Welcome. Take a moment to settle in. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breath slow. You're here now, in this quiet space, still, and far from the chaos of the waking world. Tonight, we are going to drift gently into the past. Not into the glorious past of gilded carriages and brilliant uniforms, but into the quieter, dustier spaces, the muddy footprints behind the history books. This is the story of the men who marched for Napoleon Bonaparte. Soldiers in name, but truly poor farm boys, cobblers, clerks, conscripts, caught in the great machinery of empire. These were not the grand figures of legend, but the many nameless souls who trudged across Europe on sore feet, half starved and cold, in pursuit of a dream they barely understood. Through 4 slow-moving chapters, we'll explore their world. We'll begin by stepping into their worn boots, feeling the long days, the hunger, the silence of endless marching. Then we'll follow one moment of history where that long march reached its breaking point. After that, we'll look beneath the ice and ash for the forgotten, frozen stories still emerging from the ground. And finally, we'll rise up into the lavish salons of Paris, where powdered nobility danced and drank, while others died for their glory. Let's begin. Close your eyes if you like, and imagine yourself in a tattered blue coat, marching toward an unknown front. It sucked to be a soldier in Napoleon's army. It began with your feet. You were awake before dawn. It's not because a bugle has sounded, though they often do, because the cold woke you. Again, your boots are soaked through, your socks if. You still have socks are stiff with mud. The fire went out hours ago, or perhaps it never burned at all. There was no dry kindling. There is never dry kindling. You rise from the dirt or straw or wet stone. No mattress. No blanket. The coat that was supposed to keep you warm is too thin. It was cut for summer. You have worn it through to winters. The cuffs are frayed. All the brass buttons, once polished to a shine, are dull with grime. Breakfast, if there is any, it will be bread so dry it cuts your gums. You suck the moisture from it as you walk. There is no time to stop and eat. Napoleon marches early. Napoleon marches fast. You fall in line, one of thousands. The columns stretch into the mist. You march all day, sometimes without speaking. The rhythm of boots on earth, the occasional snort of a mule, the soft creak of a musket strap that is the soundtrack of your life. Your shoulders ache under the weight of your pack. 40 pounds of necessity, flint rations, your spare uniform though it's little more than a rag, your weapon, a bayonet you may never use, but must carry always. If you fall behind, you'll lose your place. If you desert, you'll be shot. The roads are not roads, really. They are churned rivers of mud. Wheels sink, hooves slip. Sometimes you march through ankle-deep water or snow that numbs your toes until you worry you no longer have toes. And when you reach a village, it is not for rest. It is to requisition supplies, grain, wine, sometimes a chicken. The locals hate you. You sleep in barns if you're lucky. Most nights it's open ground. There are lice. Always, you scratch at night until you bleed. And dysentery too. If the bread doesn't poison you, the water might. Your officers rarely speak to you. They ride horses, their boots are dry, they wear cloaks, they dine in town halls and draft maps. You don't know where you're going. Sometimes even they don't know. But you walk always forward, always toward the next border, the next name on the list. If there's a battle, it begins suddenly. You hear the distant cannon first, the rumble beneath your ribs, then the smoke, and the shouting. You're told to fix bayonets. You do, you pray, perhaps. You fire once, maybe twice, then reload if you can.
Most don't.
Later, you are told it was a victory. You buried friends that morning, but there is no glory in it. There's no brass band. There are no medals. Just boots on a muddy road, and hunger, and cold. You may write home, but paper is rare. You may think of home, but it drifts further with every step. We are tired of this war, though you can't remember when it began. And tomorrow, you will march again. Because that is what soldiers do. It sucked to be a soldier in Napoleon's army. It started like this. One day you're a free man, the next you're a conscript. Your new uniform doesn't fit. The jacket is too big. The trousers bunch around your knees. You are issued a shako. It has no rim to keep out the rain. You've had enough of this. You want to go home. That's easy enough. Turn around and walk away from the army. Just a couple miles. You know, your village is only a few miles back. You've got a whole week's worth of rations in your pack. In your pocket, some coarse bread, a hunk of cheese. Maybe you find a farmhouse and ask for a crust of bread, a glass of milk. Do you tell them your story? The farmer looks you up and down. Some have lost their shirts, others their hats. You are different, but you are the same. It happens every single day. You are weary of marching, weary of eating, weary of war. The farmer says nothing, points across the field to a copse of trees. You understand? You find a tree and you hide. I do. It's safer there. The patrols won't look. For you, they don't look for anything. And tomorrow, you can just march on ahead and catch up to the army. Everything will be fine. In the morning, you wake with a start. A bird has relieved itself on your head. You brush it off. The sun is bright. The sky is blue. It's a beautiful day. You are hungry, but soon you will get rations. You'll hike on down the road. You'll come upon a river. It is wide and deep. On the other side, you see an entire encampment. Tents, wagons, cooking fires, cannons. This must be the French army. You call out Vive l'Empereur. They stare at you. A non-commissioned officer crosses the bridge. He walks right up to you and he asks, "What is your name?" You tell him. "Are you a deserter?" You say, "No, sir." "When did you join the army?" You shrugged. 2 weeks ago, sir." "Why did you leave?" You whisper. "They were beating us, sir." He spits on the ground. "That didn't happen." "But, sir, that happened to me once," he says. "Left the army for 3 days. I hid in the woods, ate berries, and drank rainwater. When I came out, my sergeant asked me why I was late. I said because I was sick. He took me aside and he showed me a map. He drew a circle on it. 'You walked in a circle,' he said. 'That is called insanity. Now I march again and again. This war will end, but we will still be here. Marching, you are the insanity.' He turns and he walks away. The sun is hot now. You take off your jacket. You untie your shako. You throw it in the bushes. You march on, a free man. The river was wide. The current was strong. It pulled you far from camp. You are safe now. You think about going home, but the village is gone. Where are your family? Are they looking for you? Do they think you are dead? What will you say to them? You keep walking. The fields are endless. The roads are endless. And always there is the sound of marching. You join the column. It's easier now. You are one of many. You have a purpose now. You are needed. You are a cog in the great machine. Your name is unimportant. They call you Marcel. You are Marcel. A word of warning, young soldier. It sucks to be a soldier in Napoleon's army. So what have we learned about Napoleon's invasion of Russia? Well, first of all, that Napoleon is one of the most famous people in history. Second, we learned that he led his army into Russia in 1812. And third, we learned that everything went wrong. But now it's time to take a step back and consider why this failed so spectacularly. As it turns out, there are lessons to be found here for any leader looking to improve their strategic thinking. And before we get into those lessons, let me remind you that at the start of this series, I asked you a question. I asked you whether you thought Napoleon was an evil genius or a good strategist. And if you haven't voted yet, please do. And with that, let's get started. So we've covered quite a lot of ground over the course of this series. We followed Napoleon as he assembled his grand, preparing for war and living inside the myths of his own making. Then we traveled with him deep into the Russian wilderness, seeing his plans dissolve into chaos. Now it's time to put that story into perspective. Now that we're at the end, we can see the beginning more clearly. The nature of Napoleon's ambitions, the makeup of his army, the reality of his rule, the limits of his abilities. Napoleon was ambitious, wanted more than just France. He wanted a Europe remade in his image. In some ways, this made him like the Roman emperors of old, men who sought to bring the world under one roof. But unlike the Romans, Napoleon's empire was built on sand, held together by the might of his army and the allure of his personality. The Grand was the instrument of Napoleon's will, a vast machine of men and munitions that rode the wave of his genius. When it worked, it was unstoppable. When it didn't, nothing would ever be the same. When Napoleon assembled his forces, he did so knowing he'd created something unprecedented, something magnificent. For the first time in history, hundreds of thousands of men stood ready to go to war. Not for the glory of God or king, but for the glory of war itself, for the glory of a single man. This was Napoleon's genius, drawing disparate peoples into a common cause, convincing them that the future belonged to France, to himself. At his best, he was a brilliant tactician. His victories were swift, decisive. When he won, it was like watching a machine in action, perfectly oiled, powerful beyond compare. But while Napoleon's army was large and loyal, it wasn't invincible. As it turned out, it wasn't invincible enough. First, there was the terrain. Napoleon repeatedly underestimated the Russian landscape, both in terms of its sheer size and its hostility toward invaders. And in doing so, he treated his soldiers like pawns on a board, pieces in a game he alone could see. But soldiers aren't pieces. They have needs and wants. They feel cold and hunger and fear. And if you ignore those realities, your soldiers may turn into ghosts. Napoleon never saw this coming. He understood war as a contest of wills between armies, not as a test of wills among men. This made him overconfident. He pushed his troops too hard and too fast, hoping to win before the Russians could regroup. But speed is a dangerous tool. Without awareness, without care, it becomes recklessness. Next, there was the weather. Again, Napoleon underestimated what he would face. He expected autumn. He got winter. He expected mud. He got snow. And so he equipped his soldiers for sunny campaigns, not for blizzards. And in doing so, he doomed them to walk barefoot across a frozen wasteland. He could unforesee the cruelty of the Russian winter, because he would allow himself to think about anything but winning. This is one of the problems with being a genius. It's easy to lose sight of the obvious. But in this case, the obvious was important. If Napoleon had paid attention to the weather, he might have delayed his attack, or prepared his soldiers better, or simply canceled the invasion altogether. But he didn't. Instead, he charged ahead, ignoring the warning signs, convinced that he was Napoleon. Finally, there was the Russians. Napoleon repeatedly underestimated his enemy. At every turn, he thought the Russians easier to beat than they were, slower to react than they were, weaker to break than they were. But the Russians surprised him again and again. They burned Moscow, but they also fought back. They didn't run away, but they refused to stop Napoleon either. They retreated, harassed, attacked. They kept fighting. And they were led by a man who matched Napoleon's strategic brilliance, if not his tactical flair. Alexander was the foil to Napoleon's genius. Just as fire needs water to burn, brilliance needs struggle to thrive. And Napoleon only realized too late that without Alexander to push him, he'd become lost in the maze of his own mind. In the end, Napoleon's defeat was the result of hubris. He took risks he shouldn't have taken. He underestimated his enemies. He broke his soldiers. And in doing so, he played the hand he was dealt. Looking back, it's easy to see what he should have done differently. But in 1812, that clarity belonged to hindsight. And when Napoleon finally returned to Paris, his legend had already begun to fade. As it turns out, you can't build an empire out of sand, no matter how brilliant you are. And that's the end of our story. And since we've reached the end, I thought I'd answer the question I posed you back in episode 1. Is Napoleon an evil genius or a good strategist? Well, I think the answer depends on how you define your terms. Napoleon was certainly brilliant. He changed the face of Europe, spread the ideals of the revolution. He waged war like an artist paints a canvas. But he was neither good nor nice. He was ruthless, impulsive, self-serving. To call him good would be to ignore the millions of lives he ruined along the way. So that leaves us with this. Was Napoleon a bad strategist who got lucky? Or a good strategist who got unlucky? Well, I'll leave that up to you. But I will say this. Strategy is about more than winning battles. It's about achieving your goals. And by that measure, Napoleon failed. He wanted to remake Europe. He wanted to make the world safe for democracy. He wanted to be the master of all he surveyed. But in the end, he was remembered only as a conqueror. And that's the tragedy of Napoleon. Not that he failed, but that his failure was so unnecessary. If only he'd listened to the voices around him. If only he'd paid attention to the warning signs. If only he'd considered the scale of his ambition, he might have won. That's the point. Strategy is about preparation, planning, awareness. It's about considering every possible outcome, not just the brilliant ones. And by that measure, Napoleon failed. He took his brilliant army to the edge of the world and broke it against the Russian winter. And when the smoke cleared, He was gone. His army shattered, his empire dissolved, his legacy uncertain. That's the paradox of Napoleon. He was brilliant but not wise, impulsive but not careful. He had everything it took to win, but in the end, he lost. And that's the lesson to take away. Being brilliant isn't enough. You need awareness too. If you're going to change the world, you need more than genius. You need wisdom too. Otherwise, like Napoleon, you might find yourself alone in the snow, wondering how it all went wrong.
In 1812, Napoleon made the mistake of invading Russia. His Grand was defeated and decimated by the Russian winter. The Grande, meaning literally the Great Army, was indeed an army of great size, some 400,000 strong when it entered Russia. But by the time it left, a mere 10% remained. Of those that survived the war, most did not make it home. So what happened to them? Where are the graves of Napoleon's army? When Napoleon's army retreated from Russia, he intended to rest and regroup in Poland. He assumed his army would be welcomed as liberators, but his reputation was tarnished. They knew he had invaded their country and ravaged their towns. Now, as they pulled back, the Poles rose up against him. Villages burned, crops rotted in the fields. Food became scarce and hunger drove thousands to desperate measures. Many soldiers abandoned the army, hoping to survive on their own. These stragglers likely joined bands of partisans or peasants who preyed on the army. Stragglers were often executed by firing squad. Those who deserted were viewed as cowards, traitors to the emperor. While death by combat was honorable, death by hanging considered humiliating and shameful. Yet despite all these hardships, the survivors pressed on. By the end of October, Napoleon's army was in Belarus, starving, freezing, but still dangerous. General Michel Ney wrote to Napoleon stating, "We need clothing, shoes, blankets, arms, everything. If we do not get these supplies soon, we shall perish. Without them, our soldiers will die of cold and hunger." A single blanket might have saved a life. During the winter of 1812, the Grand Army froze to death. A soldier whose name we know today only as Jean-Francois was able to escape the frozen wasteland only because a Polish woman gave him her cloak. With it, he was able to cover his head and shield his face from the wind and snow. Without it, he would have died. Napoleon wanted his men out of Belarus. He planned to cross the Niemen River into Poland. According to historian Adam Zamoyski, Napoleon ordered the bridges over the river to be destroyed so that his troops could not retreat. This shows Napoleon believed his army could not lose any more men, and was determined to take the offensive and defeat the Russians again. Napoleon needed his men to be in fighting condition. Any that could not march were left behind to die. As they crossed the ice-jammed river, others slipped into the water and froze. The surviving soldiers trudged on until they reached relative safety. Napoleon had hoped his army would be met with cheers along his path through Poland. Instead, they were attacked by December, half of the men had been killed. 50,000 men in 4 days. With only 75,000 men remaining, Napoleon ordered his troops to stop marching and to live off the land, stealing whatever they needed from the peasants. But the peasants had already suffered under the rule of Napoleon's ally, Tsar Alexander I, and they were unwilling to share their meager rations with the Grand. Guerrilla attacks continued, weakening the Grande further. By January, only 27,000 men remained. All the while, disease and starvation claimed lives. One soldier named Johann Ludwig, a grenadier in Napoleon's Imperial Guard, described the suffering of Napoleon's army during their retreat. The corpses of privates and officers lay unburied on the ground, creating a horrible stench. Ludwig recalled his comrades gnawing on bones and eating lice-infested meat. He witnessed many acts of cannibalism, including a horrifying incident where soldiers killed and ate a young girl. As they moved through villages, they looted food and seized livestock, carting them along as they went, but the animals died along the way. Ludwig writes that the stench from the decaying cattle caused such suffering that many soldiers ran away, only to freeze to death in the forest. Ludwig himself fled, hiding in a haystack for 2 weeks. He survived on stolen horse meat and haggled over prices in order to buy rye bread. Eventually, he was captured by Russian soldiers and imprisoned. Ludwig's story is only one of many accounts of the retreat from Russia. Other soldiers told tales of men eating their leather belts and boots. Others resorted to drinking hot urine, believing it would help stave off starvation. Most lacked the strength to march. Soldiers collapsed from exhaustion and were left behind. They were so weak, they could not rise again. The French army had become a shadow of its former self. Many of Napoleon's men died along the Berezna River. The bridge across the river was destroyed, and the soldiers were forced to wait 7 days for the river to freeze over. During their wait, they were harassed by Cossacks and starved. When the ice finally formed, it was not strong enough to bear the weight of the horses. The men were forced to abandon their mounts and trudge through the ice-jammed river. Men fell through the ice and drowned or froze solid. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Narishkin remembered men struggling to pull themselves out of the water and dragging themselves onto the ice. Some lay down on the ice and never moved again. Historian Adam Zamoyski states that several thousand men perished crossing the Berezina. Only 30,000 men remained. After the Berezina, Napoleon's army began their trek into Poland. They arrived hungry and exhausted, but Napoleon refused to allow them to seize food from the peasants. He declared that they should live off their last hope. But within 3 days, his men began looting the countryside. By February, only 10,000 men remained, and 2 months later, Napoleon was forced to surrender. Of the Grande 7,000 strong that invaded Russia, only 10% lived to return home. That's around 40,000 men. The majority of Napoleon's men were lost due to starvation, exposure, and the elements. Some froze to death, some died of exhaustion, and others did not survive their illnesses. Although Napoleon's army was victorious in major battles against the Russians, their victories were short. The scorched earth policy devastated the land and the Russian people, and the cold, unforgiving winters proved to be Napoleon's ultimate enemy. The survivors of the Grande were haunted by the ghosts of their comrades, shuffling silently through the snow. Even today, 200 years later, the bones of Napoleon's men are being discovered by farmers planting their crops. Each bone unearthed is a new discovery, a chance to learn about the men who died during the retreat from Russia. Bodies were buried haphazardly, quickly, with little ceremony, and many were lost to the shifting sands of time. But even without ceremony, the men of Napoleon's army have been remembered. Over the years, cemeteries have been established along the route of Napoleon's retreat. The most notable is the 1812 military cemetery near the village of Piskarev, Russia. Here the remains of Napoleon's soldiers and Russian prisoners of war lie together, finally united after 200 years. A final tally of how many men died during Napoleon's invasion of Russia and subsequent retreat is impossible. Historians estimate between 300,000 and 600,000 men perished. The land has given up her dead, and we can only guess at the number of souls resting beneath the soil. We know that they died from battles, starvation, and exposure. We know they froze to death and succumbed to illness. We know that they were killed for desertion, and we know that some took their own lives. They are the silent casualties of Napoleon's ambition, lost forever in the frozen wastelands of Russia. Their story is one of tragedy, of ambition, and loss. What surprises me most about the retreat from Russia is that Napoleon did everything he could to avoid letting his men surrender. He wanted every man he could get back to fight for him. What surprised you about Napoleon's army? What shocked you? What intrigued you the most? Let us know your thoughts.
So far, we've looked at soldiers on campaign, artillerymen taking terrible losses, and women running farms. You can find those videos if you follow the links below or by clicking the cards here. This week I wanted to change the pace and look at the home front, specifically the elegant drawing rooms and gardens of Paris. These are the civilians caught between the grandeur of empire and the grim realities of total war. But before we begin, as always, I'm asking for your support. One of my goals this year is to reach a wider audience with historical stories like these. If you enjoy the content I produce and would like to help me out, please hit that subscribe button. By 1805, much of Europe was at war. France, Austria, Russia, Sweden, Britain, they all had troops on the continent, fighting across borders and over old grudges. The coalitions opposed to Napoleon seemed never-ending. But none of that chaos could touch the gilded halls of the Paris salons. It was impossible to imagine the horrors of war in such a refined environment. So let us try. Imagine yourself now, not as a soldier, but seated on a velvet settee in a candlelit drawing room. The fire crackles, your boots are polished, your hands are clean, a crystal glass of red wine rests by your side, and the scent of violets lingers in the air. Here, war is spoken of with detached admiration. The emperor has moved into Russia, someone says. A brave maneuver, bold, dangerous. A general's wife nods solemnly, then sips her drink. They do not speak of the bodies. They have not seen the men walking barefoot through snow. Their world is stitched in silk. The salons were not just social spaces, they were power hubs. Here, politicians, poets, courtesans, and aristocrats gathered beneath painted ceilings to shape the flavor of the era. Here, the ideas of the Enlightenment took form. The American and French revolutions were recent memories. Republicanism, liberalism, nationalism, these concepts had been discussed here and then taken to the streets. That same energy now coursed through conversations about the East and the West, about Egypt and Poland. Everyone had opinions. Everyone thought the future worth fighting for. They quoted Voltaire, Candide and Rousseau, Montesquieu and Necker. They debated the merits of republicanism versus empire, often with clever smiles and practiced tones. One could be arrested simply for criticizing the government, but that didn't stop the debates. Words were weapons too. And many in the salons believed in the power of polite discourse. But being a civilian during wartime meant living with fear. France was not untouched. Every noble family had sent someone to fight. Letters arrived, often unopened, with names read aloud at dinner, sometimes with pride, sometimes with silence. There were tears, though they were private. Sometimes news from the front would arrive, and then the conversation would turn to logistics. We need to make sure our men are fed properly, someone might say, or the cold weather will kill them. And then someone else would reply, but the emperor will protect them. He won't let anything happen. The idea that Napoleon somehow cared for each individual soldier was a popular one, aided in part by hundreds of paintings depicting him on horseback, visiting wounded veterans, talking to peasants. Such scenes were said to be moving. They also reassured the anxious wives and mothers. The emperor visited the sick, so he must care. And so the parties continued. Opera houses performed for packed crowds, new plays premiered, new ballets debuted. There was laughter and applause. That night, painters unveiled grand canvases depicting victories in Italy, the Alps, the Netherlands. They were greeted with thunderous applause. The salons buzzed with similar energy. The Empress Josephine was a patron of art, fashion, decorum. Her influence was considerable. She had once dressed as a man to attend a party in disguise, but now she preferred fine gowns. Her court was famous for its extravagance. Fashion was political, too. Men wore tailored jackets, sometimes adorned with the imperial insignia. Women curled their hair in Greco-Roman styles, emulating the classical age Napoleon so adored. The empire was in vogue. Everything was touched by its presence. From the porcelain on the table to the music played on the harpsichord, even perfume carried an imperial label. Everything spoke of grandeur and sacrifice, of duty and victory. Such images had been seeping into the public consciousness for years. Now, the effect was complete. The war had become a kind of mythology, glorious, romantic, sanitized. It elevated the empire and offered purpose to privilege. It was possible to live completely insulated from the violence, cut off from the consequences of war. Food could be bought in shops. Markets were full of game and produce. Servants carried silver platters into drawing rooms where guests sipped wine and ate well. Children were born and christened. Friends were invited to come see the newest fashions. Sometimes there were parades in the street. Veterans marched past with fife and drum, their uniforms bright against the gray stone buildings. Afterwards, there would be champagne and congratulations. Oh, what a wonderful day. Come, let's raise a toast to the emperor, to Napoleon. And meanwhile, deep in the Russian winter, the reality was quite different. The soldiers huddled around small fires, too weak to cook, too hungry to gather wood. They were dying by the thousands, their bodies littering the snow. Blisters burst on their faces. Coats were rags, their bellies growled, their eyes burned. They were ghosts in gray uniforms. They walked through the frozen landscape, seeking food, seeking warmth, seeking life. And few knew it, but behind them, Paris was already forgetting. In the spring of 1806, the French army marched into Prussia. The King of Prussia fled to a remote castle, and Berlin fell to the conquerors. Soon, Vienna would tremble. Soon, Moscow would burn. But for now, the Parisians celebrated. The Prussians had been routed. Napoleon was victorious again. In fact, he was invincible. So everyone danced. Music played. Champagne flowed. The artists captured the moment on canvas. The poets put pen to paper. Critics praised everything. This was the age of miracles. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could stop it. Throughout the era, the arts glorified war and celebrated victory. Military victories inspired poems, novels, paintings, sculpture, music. War was glorious. War was beautiful. War made men heroes. Artists and intellectuals created a mythology around Napoleon, portraying him as a modern Caesar, a second Alexander the Great, the man of destiny, destined to rule Europe. Such propaganda wasn't new. Every powerful leader cultivated admirers, but the speed and scope of it was. Entire institutions were created to promote Napoleon's image. Schools, newspapers, museums, opera companies, theaters, libraries, even chairs of rhetoric were established to ensure that people understood the divine mission of the empire. The cult of the leader was a masterpiece of public relations, designed to garner support, to convince the populace that the emperor truly was a benevolent god. The truth was quite different. The reality was that every bullet, every cannonball, every bayonet carried death.
Ow.
There were no polite dinners for those in the field. The food tasted bad. Sometimes there was little to eat, no salons for them either. The mud and the blood stuck to their clothes. There were no velvet settees, there was only dirt, when no wine, only water that sometimes tasted of blood. Theirs was a brutal existence filled with the stench of death and the sound of despair. But the Parisians did not know this because no one told them. The letters from the front were carefully censored. The bad news kept from reaching the capital. The clack of carriages echoed through the empty streets. The city was eerily quiet, almost as if it had emptied to go watch the parade. The shops were shuttered, the markets abandoned. Even the birds seemed to have flown away. It was hard to believe that the soldiers were coming back at all. But then, a rumble on the horizon, a flash of color, a shout from a child. And then they were there, the veterans, walking slowly, silently through the gates. No music, no cheering, no great welcome. They slipped into the shadows. Their uniforms were tattered. Their eyes were hollow. Many returned to the country, slipping back into rural silence. Some beggars on the boulevards they once marched down with pride. The salons whispered, then looked away, because Paris had already moved on. So now, the drums have fallen silent. The banners are tattered. The names, long forgotten by most. The stories those that survived have been worn smooth by time, like coins passed through many hands. You are alone again, or perhaps not alone. Perhaps there are others gathered here with you in the twilight. Soldiers, scholars, dreamers, those seeking an echo of the past in the hushed stillness of dusk. You are here in the long grass by the riverbank, in the shadow of a crumbling tower. Here where the eagles have nested and the armies clashed, where hope was born and hope was lost. Here where the world shifted and changed and marched on without a backward glance. You are here where the past still breathes. The soldier sleeps beneath a mound of earth and bone, his face forgotten, his story scattered on the winds. Who was he? Where did he come from? Why did he fight? Why does it matter? He is here. Now his comrades lie around him, and there is peace here, a peace. It's more profound than any that might have known in life, for the wheel of time turns ever onward, and the living well they must go on to. But sometimes, just sometimes, they come back here to remember. To stand in the hush of a forgotten field and know that somewhere, somehow, someone gave their last breath here. Someone laughed, shouted, prayed, fell, lived, died. Someone, somewhere, somehow, was real, and you are here. With them now, the centuries melt away like mists before the sun. You feel the chill of the winter wind on your cheeks, the sting of snow on your eyelashes, the bite of frost on your fingertips. You watch the soldiers march, hear the clash of arms, see the banners stream in the wind. You taste the sweat of exertion, the fear, the grime of weeks without water, the dust of endless roads. You smell the horses, the leather, the musk, the smoke, the blood. You are here, and the past is alive. The great captains are dead and gone. Their names are echoes, their faces obscured by time. They sought to change the world and left only questions in their wake. What did they see when they gazed on the fields before them? Did they see a nation born, or a nation fall? Did they see themselves? Did they hear the quiet cries of the dying men? Did they feel the cold seep into their bones? Did they ever know the cost of glory? You are here, the twilight. You feel the weight of their dreams, their schemes of conquest and dominion. You feel the world tremble with the force of their ambitions. The soldier moves restlessly in his sleep, muttering, dreaming, haunted by faces from a past life. Half remembered, half imagined. Is he dreaming of home, or of battle, of love, or of loss? You do not know, nor do you need to. For in the end, it is all the same. All roads lead here, to this place where the only constant is change, where the only law is that nothing lasts. Here, the dead have known more seasons than the living ever will. They have watched empires rise and fall, the slow decay of monuments, the ceaseless turning of the earth. Here, the past is never truly past. It is woven into the fabric of the present, a thread of memory, a whisper on the wind, the rustle of leaves in an ancient wood. So now close your eyes. Let the noise of battle drift away. Let the frozen rivers thaw. Let the boots stop marching. You are no longer in the field. You're no longer waiting at the Berezina. You are no longer a soldier. You are safe. You are home. And history will hold the rest.